Welcome to the Parsha Perspective. Each week, we will delve deep in a weekly Torah portion to find a practical and insightful way to enhance your daily life. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Rabbi Shalom Yamini, and each week we will look into the weekly Torah portion to find practical and insightful ways to enhance your daily life. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of our homeland, Eretz Yisroel. May Kadosh Baruch Hu, may God continue to protect our brave soldiers, and may God return all the hostages from Gaza immediately. This week's Parsha Perspective is in honor of the Refuah Shalema of Pesha Hena Bas Yata Gittel, along with all those who need to experience a speedy and complete recovery. This week's Parsha Perspective is in loving memory of Edward ben Ephraim, Shlomo ben Edward, and Yerachmed Daniel ben Gedaliah. May their souls be uplifted, and may their memories be a blessing. This week's Torah portion is Parshas Vayikra, Essence over Ego. Our Torah portion opens up the third book of the Torah, Sefer Vayikra, also known as Torah's Kohanim, the Book of Kohanim. This Sefer, this book of the Torah, primarily focuses on the sacred service performed by the Kohanim, by the priests, by the Levim, the Levites, in the Mishkan, and later, obviously, in the Beis Mikdash, in the Temple. It also focuses on many laws regarding purity and impurity of spiritual concern. Parshas Vayikra, our Parsha, opens up with the first time that God speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu from within the tent, from within the Mishkan itself. And from this holy place, God teaches Moshe Rabbeinu about the laws of the Karbanis, the offerings that were brought on the Mizbeach, on the altar that was in the courtyard of the Mishkan. The first Karban that Moshe Rabbeinu was taught is the Oila, the elective offering completely consumed by fire and brought solely for the sake of honoring God. The next was the Chatas, the sin offering, brought to atone for a transgression of the Torah commandments. The Shlomim was a voluntary peace offering brought to express gratitude, and it was shared between the donor, the Kohanim, and even the Levim. The Asham was a guilt offering brought when a person was uncertain whether they violated a Torah prohibition. However, a question comes to mind. With all the intricate details of the sacrifices of the Karbanis, the Torah pauses to tell us not what to bring, but what not to bring on the altar. The pasuk states, "Kol mincha asher takruvu laHashem lo yisaseh chametz ki kol saor v'chol davash lo yisaktiru isha laHashem." No meal offering that you offer to God may be with yeast, and for no yeast or honey may be turned into an offering for by fire to God. But why would the Torah forbid two ingredients that seem both natural and appealing? What is about yeast and honey, two symbols of flavor and elevation, that makes them incompatible not only with the Mizbeach, but with the very essence of a korban, of a sacrifice? The Rambam, Rav Moshe ben Maimon, a prolific scholar and philosopher, gives an answer in his Moreh Nevuchim, in his guide for the perplexed. And he writes that karbanis, that sacrifices, were not to include any ingredients that were commonly used in pagan rituals. Honey was a frequent element of idol worship, and yeast offerings were a staple amongst idol worshippers. And to distance the Jewish people from these influences, the Torah forbade their use on the Mizbeach, on the altar. And this explanation fits with the Rambam's broad view that many mitzvahs were given to separate, to make a distinction between the Jewish nation and pagan practices. Even the smallest details, like a pinch of honey or the rise of dough, was not just physical, it reflected a mindset that the Torah came to uproot. And according to the Rambam, the entire concept of a korban was to help a person return to God after a sin. But sin only exists because of the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And without that inner struggle, there would be no transgression, there would be no need for atonement. And that's why the Torah removes not only the act of sin, but even its flavor, its sweetness, its rise. Holiness must begin pure. It cannot grow from ingredients that may be rooted in impurity. However, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson of blessed memory, gives a deeper and more profound explanation. And he writes that while the Torah forbids yeast and honey, it requires salt to be brought with every mincha, with every offering, and every sacrifice. The contrast is striking and intentional. Salt has no sweetness, no shine, no alluring taste. It doesn't stand out, it doesn't entertain, but it transforms. In Chassidus, the Rebbe explains, salt becomes a symbol of bittul, self-nullification. The soul who embodies salt is not trying to perform. It is not searching for emotional highs or mystical experiences. It simply wants to serve, to be real, to be a vessel for truth. And that's why salt belongs on the altar. Salt belongs on the Mizbeach. Because the altar is not a stage. It's not a place for ego or self-expression. It is a moment when the soul says, I don't need to be seen. I want God to be seen through me. And that kind of offering, quiet, honest, unadorned, is what rises straight to heaven. Honey, by contrast, represents sweetness. It draws people in. It's attractive, but it also adds. It coats, and it brings something external to the surface. In the language of Hasidus, the Rebbe writes that it symbolizes spiritual delight, but that it is still wrapped in the self, in the I. I want to feel close to God rather than I want to be close to God. And it is not forbidden in all situations, but when it comes to the sacrifice, when it comes to the korban, the offering that comes from the deepest part of the soul, honey gets in the way, because truth doesn't always taste sweet. Yeast, like honey, alters the original element. It causes things to rise, to expand, to become something they weren't before. And at times, it reflects ego, inflation, performance. But salt, no, salt preserves. It lasts. It doesn't fade like emotional highs. It doesn't burn away and burn out like inspiration. The Torah calls it a bris melach olam, a covenant of salt that is eternal, that is unbreakable. It represents a bond that isn't based on how spiritually we feel, how inspired we are, or how much we glow. It is based on who we are. We are God's people, not because we are sweet, because we belong to Him. Salt with no fanfare brings out what is hidden. It draws out the flavor that is already inside. It reveals the essence. And when placed on a sacrifice, when placed on a korban, it lifts the offering to become what it is always meant to be, a true piece of God. Yeast and honey bring something foreign. They change the essence instead of revealing it. They rise, they coat, and they fade. And when we bring our offering, when we seek to return to our God, to our Creator, to our Father in heaven, it must come from total honesty. It must come from the essence, from the soul that says, I am not here to impress. I'm here to be one. And that's why salt is required with every offering, with every sacrifice. Because it does not bring flavor, it brings truth. And that truth the Rebbe teaches us is what opens the gate of the final redemption. This lesson becomes even more relevant as we approach Pesach, the holiday of freedom. On the Seder nights, we recount the story of our exodus from Egypt, our redemption, not just to remember the miracles, but to awaken our awareness of God's constant presence in our lives. We will speak of the love He has shown us since the days of Avraham Avinu, who at the age of 99 years old gave his entire self to God. We reflect on God who acts beyond nature, who hides in plain sight, who lifts us even when we don't see it. And as we taste the matzah, the bread of affliction, the bread with no yeast, we are reminded that true freedom begins with humility. It begins with salt. It begins with bittul. It begins with self-nullification. It begins when we strip away the extras and return to the essence. And that is how we prepare for the Geula. That is how we prepare for the ultimate redemption. By becoming a people who do not reflect our own light, no, but reflect His infinite holiness. In our daily life, it is imperative to realize that the most meaningful contributions often come without recognition. We live in a culture that celebrates noise, visibility, and speed. But the moments that shape us are usually quiet. Integrity, discipline, truth don't draw attention, but they hold everything together. When we stop trying to impress and start striving to be real, we create a space for something greater to move through us. What lasts is not the performance, but the presence. Not what we build around us, but what we refine within. There's a great quote that I once read. Freedom is not becoming more. It is becoming real enough to remember who you are already. Have a great weekend and good Shabbos.
Thank you for tuning in to the Parsha Perspective. Check out our website, theparshaperspective.com.
Send thoughts and comments to the Parsha Perspective at gmail.com. Till next time, thanks for listening.